Well, hello and welcome to this case study on illness and injury. So my name is Dan Woodruff. I'm the founder of Woodruff Financial Planning, and what we're going to do in this fairly short video is to take you quite quickly through an example case study of how somebody who's going through or has gone through some sort of serious illness or injury and how the financial planning process can help them. So just before we get started, I'm just going to take you through the kind of strengths and weaknesses of the financial planning approach. I mean, basically what we're trying to do with the financial plan is to give you clarity about the future. And if you're going through a serious life-changing event like a serious illness or injury, you're going to have a lot of concerns about how the future pans out for you, especially with money. And ultimately, what a financial plan can do for you is to make cautious assumptions about the future and to help you to visualise whether you've got enough money to live the life that you would hope and expect in the future. From there, we can help you to focus on action that you can take to perhaps improve your situation in many different ways. And part of that is to test alternative scenarios. So in this situation, we're going to look at what would have happened had the client continued in a healthy situation versus what happens in an illness situation, and then the solutions with an example financial settlement following some sort of court case. So part of the approach we're going to take is to look at some disaster planning as well. And really what we're trying to do is give you a good idea as to whether you're going to be secure no matter what. Now, there are some weaknesses to this approach, and basically what the main weakness of financial planning is it makes assumptions about the future. And of course we can't predict the future because your life will change, the predictions will prove to be incorrect. So the way around that is to make cautious assumptions about how we view the future, and more importantly to review your progress as your life changes and as life changes basically, and how the results come in, we can then adjust to the situation. The other major danger of this approach is we're making assumptions about the future, that the future is going to work in a sort of linear way. So inflation is going to be 1%, investment growth will be another, and so on. And of course the reality is that the world doesn't work like that. So what we need to do is stress test those different situations, and that's what we do for a normal financial plan. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief overview as to the case study that we're showing you here. So we've got Mr. and Mrs. injury. Basically the husband has become injured, and it's a serious injury, and he has, after some period of time, he's been to see a solicitor, and he has been awarded a significant payout. And this is a sort of typical example of, in a serious injury situation, a kind of payout that could be possible. Of course, they do range from a few £1,000s to millions of pounds, but this will give you a flavour as to how this kind of situation might work. Now, in many cases we deal with that they end up going into what's called a personal injury trust. Now, we're not really going to consider that too much in this case study, but basically that enables you to ring fence the settlement that the husband would have received away from means tested state benefits, so that he can still continue to get those state benefits in the future. An alternative is to take the money and obviously not receive those means tested state benefits. That's a conversation for another video, but basically the husband is about to receive £800,000 and needs to know whether that's going to be enough to keep him secure in the future. And so basically they're considering their future. These are typical considerations that would come up in this situation. Can his wife afford to give up work and help him to live, perhaps become a carer? Would they be able to afford to buy a new home with that money? That's normally a serious consideration at this point, especially with a large amount of money coming in. And maybe they want to buy a home that's on one level or needs some sort of improvement to help him cope with his new his injuries. After that, should they invest the money? And what could that money do for them in terms of income? And ultimately, will they ever run out of money? And it's no point looking towards a comfortable existence in the short term, as it would be easy to do with £800,000, given that this person may expect to live a normal lifespan. In the example we're showing you here, they're both in their 40s. So in the normal state of affairs, unless it's a life-threatening injury, we would expect them to live another 40 years at least. On average. So we have to look towards the very long term with these kind of plans. Okay, so what we're going to do now is switch to the financial planning software. So this is a simplified version of how we would deal with an individual situation. So what we're looking at here are Mr. and Mrs. Injury in their current position, and here are their assets to start with. So they've done some saving. They've got some cash ISAs, and then they've got a couple of pension plans which they've got through their workplace, and of course they can't access some of this money now. So the yellow, if you look over on the top right here, the readily realisable assets are the most flexible assets. These are assets that they could cash in tomorrow and use to fund some sort of change to their house to cope with the injury. Well, of course they've got limited funds here, haven't they? They've got £30,000, although that's useful, but it wouldn't last forever. They've got some pensions. These are the yellow box here. Unfortunately, because they're in their 40s, that money is unlikely to be accessible. If you look in the bottom right hand corner here, you can see those yellow funds continuing but then changing to blue, and that's because with the new flexible pensions we assume that that money becomes accessible from age 55. That's the limit, and at that point they move from being yellow to blue, so they become more flexible and accessible. Unfortunately, they do have a mortgage, which is very common for someone in their 40s, so we have to bring that into consideration when we examine how their future is going to look. And of course they've got a property. This is a normal sized valued property for someone in their sort of situation. So if you look to the bottom right hand corner here, what we can see is after inflation how we see their assets going. So we've taken the top right detail, the left hand side, and put that into a bar chart, and you can see basically stripping out inflation, looking at in today's terms how we expect that money to work going forward as assets. Now you can also see there's some red here, and that's the mortgage being gradually paid off over the next 10 or so years. So this tells us something. It doesn't tell us everything at this stage. It tells us a bit of the puzzle. So what we then need to look at is their income. So at the moment they're both working, or at least they would have been before the injury. We've got David's salary there and Donna's salary. And of course, in this situation, if someone goes for a serious illness, we would typically expect that person maybe to have to stop that kind of work. Maybe they could find a different work, but maybe it won't be paid as much. So we can cope with looking at these different assumptions about how their income may change in the future. In this case, we're assuming that David would not be able to work because of the severity of his injuries, and because of that, his wife would want to be able to give up work to cope with looking after him and making his future as comfortable as possible. But before the injury, they had a fairly stable income source. Adding the two together, after inflation, you can see their income being fairly stable, and then stopping at age 65 when they retire until they get their state pensions at 67. Now, of course, the reality is if we switch to David becoming disabled, we've made different assumptions about their future. So at the moment we've got Donna having a salary, and they've got some various state benefits coming in. Now the state benefits very much depend on the injury and the situation and the assessment and everything else. We've just made some basic assumptions for the purpose of this calculation. But you can see their income, if we look at their net spendable income, their income was £4,000 a month before the injury. Well, after the injury, look at the net spendable income, it's almost halved. And of course, that's going to have a big impact on their future stability and security. So at the moment, we're looking at a reduction of income, but of course they know they're going to get this settlement coming in, and that will have a big impact on how their future may look. So before we go any further, we have to think about how much they spend. So I've simplified things somewhat. We've got a mortgage, the general household expenditure, and the pension money plus tax. And of course, when you're earning, you'll pay more tax than when you're not earning. So they're spending nearly £60,000 a year. And if we look at the differential between the two, so this is blue being surplus, more income than expenses, red being deficit, more expenses than income. So for most years in the future, we're projecting forward to age 100, they are projecting a surplus, and of course that surplus, if they don't spend it, would be then put towards their future in the form of some sort of savings, which will go towards helping when they stop work. So put all that together, had the husband David not become injured, this is how the money coming in and the money going out would look. So blue is money coming in per tax year, red is money going out, and you can see that there are excesses of income over expenditure for most years, apart from this year here, which I think is when some larger expenditure is coming in. So how does that sort of pan out into their future? Well, here is what we call their lifetime cash flow forecast. So this is their readily realisable, flexible assets as they grow. The pension comes into the plan at age 55. They continue working. Then they take an annuity at age 65, and they've got enough money to cope with their predicted expenses for the rest of their life. So they would have been on a fairly straightforward path towards retirement. We would have obviously been talking to them about changing their retirement date potentially, but they would have been in a fairly strong position. What we want to do is then compare that with the disability situation. So instead, we've got state benefits. We haven't got David's income. We've still got Donna's income in this situation. And here we're showing that they've got more expenses. If they want to carry on living the same lifestyle as they do at the moment, something's going to have to give. And you can see that quickly their £30,000 sort of cash savings are going to be exhausted quite quickly, aren't they? So what would they have to do in that situation? They would probably have to cut their cloth accordingly and cut back on their expenses. So let's look at how that works in terms of lifetime cash flow. Well, it's a mess, isn't it? And basically what it shows is that they're going to run out of money within a year if they don't take some drastic action. So of course that's a pretty dramatic situation, and you'll know of plenty of stories of people who are on state benefits who were previously relatively well off, suddenly becoming not so well off and having to really adjust their lifestyle. So what they're interested in really is what they're going to do with this settlement. So we have taken a different view with a financial settlement, and basically what we've said is let's look at allowing them to make some changes to their current position. So they're going to pay off their mortgage, they're going to buy a new house worth about £500,000, so that's taken about £300,000 out of their settlement, and they're going to keep some money aside for emergencies and move their money into ISAs and an investment account. It's just simply showing what would we do if we did the initial house purchase and then invested the rest and made that money work for them in the future. Now in this situation they wouldn't get certain means tested benefits, so we have to exclude some of the benefits. But let's overlay the settlement cash flow forecast with their current cash flow forecast, and you can see that more money comes into the pot quite quickly. It would deplete somewhat, the pensions would come in, and basically they would have been actually in a better position than they would have been had they not had the serious illness and injury. But of course the reality might be that they may have greater expenses in the future. So if we start to add those in, that may have a different impact on their future. So hopefully what this has shown you is how we can look at different scenarios according to someone's individual situation. And of course every situation is very different to the others. So we have to take it step by step through the income, the expenses, the assets and liabilities of the individual concerned. But hopefully that's been useful. If you're interested in talking to us about your own illness or injury, the number is obviously below this video or on the website. Please give us a call. We'll be happy to have a discussion with you.